Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us to talk about the transformation of our living conditions. To discuss this topic, it's my pleasure to have to my right Ronnie Karam. He's the chair of the Lebanese Foundation for Renewable Energy. It's an NGO that promotes quick transition towards clean energy, notably in Lebanon, and you'll tell us why it is a pressing matter. And you also have a career in real estate across the Atlantic. Also with us, Catherine GUILLOUARD. She's the CEO of RATP, so the public transport network for Paris, for the Paris region. But it's a lot more than transport, actually diversifying in housing and optic fiber. Arnaud GANGLOFF is the CEO of Kia & Partners. It's a consultancy firm that has put sustainable development at the heart of its consulting work. And together with me to facilitate this session, Ariel MENDEZ from the Cercle des Économistes. I'll first give the floor to Ariel, just to tell you by way of introduction that our living conditions, that's a very broad concept. If we look up the definition in a dictionary, it is your living environment. It is the environment that surrounds any person. So where they live, where they work, also transport, but where they shop. So everything that makes up our environment in an urban as well as in a rural environment. Ariel, you'll share with us your vision, your insight. So, transforming our living environments, well, this sounds like an appeal, a call, an injunction. Bruna just touched upon it. What do we mean by our environment or our living conditions? It's where we live. And for 54% of the world population, it's an urban environment. That proportion should reach 70% by 2050. So our urban urban environments prevail more and more. It comes with opportunities. They generate over 80% of world GDP. But it also generates pollution, stress, anxiety. So it's an environment that is fraught with challenges, with the rise in temperature, question of air quality, management of waste, water management. These issues call upon us to become more frugal in our lifestyle and in, transforming our environment. In cities that tend to be more and more densely populated, there is creation of wealth, but cities develop, urbanization spreads under the pressure of the arrival of new inhabitants with a form of exodus. But if we looked only at urban areas, we would disregard a whole part of the situation. With the health crisis, we've observed a number of trends facilitated by digital transformation, people moving away from big cities to medium-sized towns or even outside of urban environment. So, of course, trends are at play not only in urban environments but also in rural environments and at the interface between these different types of environment. But Bruna also mentioned that when we talk of our environment. It is the environment that is specific to each and every one of us. Health crisis really sped up the development of teleworking, and the figures and statistics sometimes are a bit a case of not being able to see the forest for the tree, because it's true that people today work more in the Paris region, but it is nonetheless a deep trend, which means that some of the services, for example, transports, are not sufficiently adapted, not modular enough or scalable enough. And of course, there's the impact of digital technology. So our living conditions vary a great deal from one person to another. And it's also highly subjective, in as much as we don't aspire all to the same living environment, which begs the question, how should we act to transform our living conditions and our living environment? So there are different levers we can play upon. Clearly, we're not going to use the same solutions everywhere, but there's one observation we can make pretty much everywhere, is that the most sustainable transformations are the ones that are engineered by all stakeholders, public authorities, local population, businesses. It's actually a collective effort. There's a need for collaboration to give more purpose, a purpose to the actions that are being taken, and I think that is what our panelists will no doubt talk about. Well, let's try and divide this panel discussion in two parts. First, the lie of the land. Where are we at after the last couple of years? Many things have changed, many aspects of our living environment have changed because of the pandemic. And in the second part, what we can leverage to transform our living environments and work towards something that is more in line with our aspirations. I'd like to put a slightly personal question to each and every one of you. I'd like to ask, what changes have you experienced over the last couple of years in your living environments? Ronnie Karam. Yes, hello everybody. Well, I was in Lebanon during COVID. Restrictions were a lot less stringent compared to France. And the specificity in Lebanon, and maybe I can come back to this, your neighbors are something that's very important. So we experienced this COVID crisis with our neighbors, so it sort of created a stronger connection. And I played table tennis with my granddaughter. And working from home has always been part of my life, so that hasn't been a complete change with a view to what COVID forced us to do. So more social connections and what digital technology made possible for you. Yes, I went on working with the US and with NGOs. So we kept working and didn't really suffer for too many restrictions, and we found we talked with people more, people around us in our neighborhood, people who couldn't go out too much or couldn't drive anymore. Thank you, Ronnie Karam. Catherine Guillouard. Well, as the CEO of the RATP group, we were really, in the front line. there's been a complete a dramatic drop in traffic. So we experienced what all businesses experienced, I believe, which is to go from overnight to teleworking and encouraging our 10,000 plus employees to work from home. And what was very much a concern for me was to preserve the connection between people who were still in the field, who were still working on actually working on automation of lines, working on the extension of some of our metro lines for the Greater Paris area, all the operational teams that were still in the field, and keep the connection between these and the people who were working from home, so that there wouldn't be a two-tier system with people who would have been protected working from home and people who were still in the field. We worked on a top 500 in our company, and I had an executive committee meeting and a management committee meeting on a daily basis. So paradoxically, we spoke more, we communicated more. Even though we had always communicated a lot, we communicated even more. And what was also a major point of attention was the protection of users and customers. So we intensified the cleaning of all our coaches and cars. And lastly, and I'll stop there, but it's absolutely essential, working from home really caused a 10% drop in traffic. So we are currently really moving to a completely different society. If you look at regional trains, RERs, there's 100%, the 103% use at the weekend versus 90% during the week. So there's a real paradigm shift that is at play. So, and this is something we've really experienced firsthand. And you personally, were you on deck at all times? Well, I actually worked from home for a mere 2 weeks. Then I went back to the head office. I actually thought it important to give my full support to operational teams, because the worst is when your CEO stays safely behind their laptop on Zoom whilst operational teams are still in the field. So for me, I would say that the pandemic has been a crisis. Teams had to prove really agile to adapt our offering, to transform the network, to make it health crisis compatible. So you didn't have too much time to work on the interior decoration of your home. No, not at all. So what happened for you, Arnaud GANGLOFF? We lost 50% of our turnover, so that came as a bit of a shock. So I didn't even spend 2 weeks at home. Personally, I realized that my home could be my workplace, because so I'm one of these people, you know, who need to shave and hop on their motorbike in the morning to go to work. So I realized that that was a bit backward of me. And that actually I could work from home, but there are many things that you can't do from home. There are financial and accounting requirements that mean that you have to be there, you have to be on site. At first I was alone, 2,500 square meters, only me, and then we kind of formed a new group of people who showed up, people who were there. quick question for the audience. Please raise your hand. Who amongst you changed completely their living environment over the last couple of years? A third, roughly? Where, so a sizable share of the audience. Another question that I'll put to all of you. What are, according to you, the main aspirations of urban dwellers? We saw that cities were the environment where more and more of us are going to live. What do you think are the aspirations of urban dwellers? What kind of aspirations do they have regarding their living environment? Let's do it in the same order. Ronnie Karam. Well, people want to be happy in a pleasant living environment. Yeah, that seems pretty obvious. So it includes housing, job opportunities, economic opportunities. So flourish in as much as your work life is concerned. Education opportunities, universities. Often the best universities are in big cities. And also leisure opportunities, museums, theatres, restaurants, cinemas, all the cultural offering. But cities can induce anxiety, can induce isolation and loneliness, pollution. So that can have a negative impact on people's health. I think today people aspire to make the most of cities while mitigating its drawbacks. So loneliness and environmental nuisance or pollution. Well, people want greener spaces. They want nature to feature at the heart of cities. People also long for simplicity. I think that's an important aspiration. Catherine GUILLOUARD, people aspire to mobility and a different kind of mobility. Yes, I think the right to mobility is linked to access to jobs and to culture and being able to see your family. Our raison d'être is to commit day in, day out for better quality of life in cities. You said that we diversify in housing and connectivity and new mobility. We operate 30 different means of transport in 14 countries, and amongst those 13 different means of transport, there's shared mobility such as car sharing, carpooling, and also on-demand transport, cycling, bike hires, scooters. It's all featured in a single app, mobility as a service. I think what people expect from us is sustainable transport. We committed to cutting our greenhouse gas emissions twofold between 2015 and 2025, with 16 million worth of users. Buses represent 3/4 of our greenhouse gas emissions, and we are converting our 25 centres to electric biogas. We've already converted 48% of rolling stock, thanks to Île-de-France Mobility. Those are programs that are very costly, 1.8 billion euros worth of investment. And we've converted 9 centres out of 25. 10 are underway, and we're trying to really stick to this roadmap, bearing in mind that after metro lines, trams, and commuter trains will follow. So using public transport, the emissions of CO2 are 60% lower than when you drive a car. What's fundamental in cities is that when you have a mass transit system in an urban environment, it's about public space and a public space strategy. Because if I hop on one of the commuter trains, A or B line, it's the equivalent of a twice 14 lanes motorway. So 50,000 commuters transit every day to the city center. And this is mass transit. So on top of that, you can create green areas and have smarter urban planning. That's what mass transit allows. Our RATP, our group, tries to make the most of its industrial assets. For example, on a bus terminal, we build a kindergarten. It's actually it's a terminal for 90 buses. We have a kindergarten for 90 children, halls of residence for universities, communal gardens. Yes, you have a beautiful stock, 750 hectares worth of real estate. Well, yes, most of that would be tracks, but we also have ongoing projects that we're working on to actually work on rooftops and structures above railway tracks. And we are working with the Paris Public Hospital Network on refurbishing their head office. It's as part of public procurement, we bid and won, and we're working on a center for women who are vulnerable, housing, social housing, and the head office of the Paris Public Hospital Network. These are a few examples of our projects. We have the expertise as really project manager, and so it goes way beyond transport per se.
Dites-moi par rapport à ce sujet, comment est-ce que vous...
So on that subject, what do you think? Because you are helping companies going towards more responsibility when you are being asked about these inspirations. Where would you like to channel all this energy? Well, with COVID, we thought at one point that it would be the end of cities and everybody would go to outside the cities. For some rural areas, it doesn't change much, but at the city scale, we have to keep in mind that what is important is metropolization, and we are rather at the start, and I'm not going to say again what you've just said. That's a movement. We have to deal with the people in the metropole, but they concentrate a lot of things that we do not want anymore or need. Let's hope for it, but it's actually noisy. It's not at the heart of the diversity issues. When we carry out studies, and we go back to things that were said earlier, there are two important utopias. The first one being nature. We need to reproduce, and we know that we can do it. We can reproduce green spaces, and also the utopia of the village, the quarter of an hour where we can be all together and to have everything around us within 15 minutes on foot. We need to have places where we can meet. We need to have everything to shop and so on. I do not want to repeat what Catherine has said on the raison d'être, but when we talk about living conditions, what is important is actually the city living conditions. And I'm actually a big fan of the RATP, and I would like definitely to take all your ambitions, to make all your ambitions mine. So we need more inspiration, we need green spaces, we need a more inclusive city. and we need everything to, all the necessary shops to be within 15 minutes on foot. Why is it difficult to achieve those goals? What are the hurdles? If I were to tackle all subjects, I would have to speak at length, but I will try to focus on one subject. Namely, in those areas of the metropole and in the city, there are dwellings, there are shops, but there are also a lot of office premises. And we have to think about the place of the core company, because it's actually an environment, and we have to see it as a living environment. It was hugely impacted by everything that happened, and we've challenged 200 years of wage earning in a few months on two fundamental notions that actually determine the living environment, that is the work premises. First of all, the physical border between the frontier, between actually home and the office, and the temporal border, when we thought that we would work 35 hours a week from 9 to 5, we would say that we have seen that things have changed a lot. And this is actually something that is key. Why? Because it's actually a very important dilemma. It's also an eye-opener. Teleworking has actually answered to a lot of inspiration, because we all want comfort and agility and flexibility, and we want to be more individual in our relationship with work, and we can see it on the loyalty. It's actually an important asset. When we look at everything that is at stake for the employment of the future, we worked on this actually with a lot of partners. That raises four major questions. First of all, even if it's chosen, it's a matter. It's actually a form of Uberization. I tend to I tend to make that bigger than it is and not too specific, but it is the case. Even if we chose it, this is actually a subject matter that is important. Second major issue, in a living environment, we had a method of working, and now that we're changing our environment, we are inventing new ways of working. But it means that we need to have new monitoring methods and also new ways of abusing from this, when we can see electronic trackers to check what the employees or the salaried employees are doing. It was actually like the time card, I think. And that brings back the people to the objective of an outcome objective. And I don't think that this passage via objective and outcome would be acceptable for all people that are working. For a certain number of categories of people, that's an idea that exists, and the objectives are there to give them some impetus, but I don't think it's the ideal one. Third subject, that's actually the operational safety for some job lines, for some sectors, because being remote is also being more remote to the trade rules. And I'm working a lot with the alter ego of France at Air France. Safety is an important issue, and when people are more remote, then they tend to distantiate themselves from rules and regulations. And the fourth point, something that's coming up, it's the fact that we tend to isolate ourselves. Some studies are being carried out on this, and this actually translates into the democratic life. We get further away from the democratic life, from the city life, and voting. I don't think that we can explain the abstention rates that we've had during the last election because of this only, but this is actually a matter of concern. So we tend to have an inward-looking attitude. And everything that was adapted for this workplace, we now have a conjunctural situation that has changed. We need to have we also have companies that have focused on all teleworking, nothing on-site, and I think it's a huge mistake. We need to look into the choices of life, the way we actually apprehend work, and it's actually a central question in terms of living conditions. Thank you. We will now tackle the second part of this session. When are we going to have 10 minutes of debate? Sorry. All right.
L'heure passe, c'est terrible. J'avais envie de vous...
Time is flying, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask to each of you who's better positioned among the public authorities, the private sector, the citizen associations, the NGOs, the state to actually apprehend this answer. Well, it's an ecosystem. Nobody has the truth. When we see the size of investments that are necessary for public transportation in France, ATP has invested 8.4 billion between 2016 and 2020, and they will invest the same amount in the 4 years to come. 2.4 billions were invested and 300 millions in Tuscany on a turnover of 5.7 billion. So RATP is actually an investment machine, so to say, because it has a public service delegation agreement. So the region is key. The state also is a key actor because there's actually a plan agreement, a roadmap to fund and invest some transportation projects. What is of concern for me today is that this ecosystem is facing an investment crisis. We have the investments. We also have income that have been reduced drastically because of COVID, and we haven't changed the rates, the prices. And so we need to find new methods of funding for public transportation that should take into account positive externalities that generate these investments. When we opened Mairie de Saint-Ouen, the line 14 and Saint-Lazare at 15 minutes with an automatic metro, everything was built by labor, and they generated more than 55% in a period where people and developers knew that this major infrastructure was coming up. It was €0 was tracked on transport investment, on this positive externality that it was. There were different reports for Blanchard-Tirol and Institut Montaigne. It is now time to re-inject new fundings that would take into account those positive externalities that allow us to see and track and channel the money. When we think about the European Union, we say that they are bureaucrats, but the reality is that the new regulation coming from dating back to 22nd of June on the emissions of TFS provide that 10% will be re-injected in European public transportation. And so we should do so, because last year, for 2 years, the state actually did its job, because they've injected 4 billion of investment, but we should do more. And in Ile-de-France, which accounts for 30% of the GDP, and that doubles the historical figures, we should find there is a return on investment. Yes, indeed, we have the return on investment, but it should not come from transport revenues, but all the benefits, all the advantages, all the profits that are generated. And a lot of European cities are actually jealous, I have to say. Eni Karam, you are the founder of an NGO. From your point of view, what kind of role do the NGO play on that? I think that what is important is the citizen before all. We should give the floor to citizens, to a collective of citizens. We need to work all together to move forward at a level that would be as local as possible. It should be a bottom-up approach. It comes from the grassroots. The first inspiration is to try to give the floor to citizens, to NGOs. For instance, we have a willingness to live together, to develop ourselves together, to communicate. There are NGO initiatives of a catering type where we have collective kitchens so that people can cook together, eat together. So we have to develop this human aspect that is very important via these initiatives. We have to use public spaces as citizens. They shouldn't be only places of transit. We should organize concerts. We go to the Palais des Tuileries in Paris, for instance, and we see people at night or during the day that give Tai Chi or yoga lessons. Some actually have picnics. And we should have a bottom-up approach. We should actually implement initiatives like this, and of course the public authorities should help out these initiatives in a democratic way, because they are all about solidarity and collectivity. So you're also defending the cause of companies by putting forward the role that they have to play in this subject. Yes, I think we all say the same thing. It's more related to ecosystems. These unilateral decisions shouldn't take place. We have to give to the state its role, because they are regulatory power. They are also determining the funding. And when we carry out studies, French people think in the ballpark of 71% that the state should play its role. But there's also the corporations, companies. Why? Because they know how to work out these ecosystems. They know how to pursue this. And over the last 2 days, we've talked about diagnostics, but I would like to talk about solutions. Since 2020, 700 French companies decided to change. They have decided to say, not only am I responsible towards the shareholders, but also towards 100% of the stakeholders. In my board, I have 100% of my stakeholders. And actually, the interests are differing from one another. A wage earner, a citizen, an executive, a shareholder have all different interests. So we need to have a dialogue. We need to be able to discuss. And we have to push towards this logic. We need to be able to have companies that would embody that responsibility and that will not remain in profit silos. And there are 3 things to do that would be major actions. First of all, we should review governance. It's not possible today to have no shared governance. Beyond that, we have a common good that is the Rhône River. And you should see how the national company of Rhône has actually managed this with ENGIE. 187 public local authorities are actually on board. But we also have to change our operational method. We can't talk about nature and green spaces without overhauling the circularity, short circuit economy. And then also we need to change management. We need to reinvent ourselves on that subject in a more enlightened way. We need to focus on outcome, on performance, but not also. We also have to address society problems. We should learn it. It's not something that can be known overnight. We have to work with this management to shed light on this. Before giving the floor to the room and those that listen to us, a quick question, and I hope to have quick answers from you. If we look at urban objects to which we're all accustomed, like parking lots, like shops, like offices, what will change most? What object whose use we know will change most? Well, in terms of dwellings, first of all, the city has become expensive. The young people especially cannot pay for it. We need to find spaces. We need to pool spaces, make a community of spaces like kitchens, for instance. There are projects also where we have rooms where we can welcome guests in the same building, for instance, instead of booking for hotel rooms. That's where we are heading to, because any kind of space is becoming expensive. And of course, this will favor contact, and this is what we aim at. We need to meet, we need to share a meal together, we need to do something together. That's the pleasure that we're looking for. We need to share space. How about you, Catherine? 3 examples that I'm going to mention. We have the Zem Park, which is having sharing shared parking space. It doesn't belong to one person where you actually park. With Zen Park, we have a new concept. It can be used for other things, and we can actually have different layouts. We can have data centers there, for instance. The other versatility point is we have a program with MIT that we have developed to look into the use of pavements in Paris, because especially to improve bus traffic, and also a lot of cities, districts change. For instance, we have a parking lot during the weekdays, and during the weekend it can change its use. It can be used for other purposes. So architects will actually look at this versatility and try to instill that concept. In our headquarters, we have an amphitheater, we have co-working spaces that we will rent to other people, and we're trying to develop 140,000 square meters of co-working space that we are going to rent out, because I think that we need this plasticity, including inside infrastructures, and this will actually gain momentum. Arnaud? Indeed, I agree with what was said. Flexibility, modularity are important. How we use space, because from 2050 we can't actually artificialize new space, so we'll have to use existing space. And I will mention Mojo with Accor. They're using some hotel rooms to develop actually proximity work premises, so that they can actually work 500 meters away from their home, but not at home. And we need to maximize all uses with shared models. And I also think that we need to change the city model in a vertical way. We need to have pleasure in being there. We need to have green spaces. We need to have green walls. And this should be for the benefits of everyone. We need to bring back everyone to cities, and what we're telling each other, it should actually be to everyone's benefit. May it be for the high revenue dwellings, but also for the social dwellings, and for the intermediaries, actually, the ones that are middle class, actually, it's more difficult, let's say. 10 seconds, Catherine, just to say that what Arnaud is dreaming about, we actually did it. We transformed the workshops of the 12th line into dwellings and shops and the kindergarten. And we tried to respect all this during the works, because we upgraded it. And so we suspended works from 2 to 4 to make sure that kids could sleep. That's also taking care of stakeholders when we work with new stakeholders. I'm going to give the floor to the audience now if you have questions to ask, or if you want to say anything.
Alors, oui.
So, yes, a question in the back. Please introduce yourself. Ian Moeng from the Institute of Financing, Professional Funding of Real Estate. The important project Paris Express will transform the life of millions of people. Our impression is that there's no pilot on the plane. To steer how we will shape the new social balance of the Paris region, that's the feedback we have, each of the mayors, with the 68 regional communities. They would wish to have a few shops, a few social dwellings, but there's no consistent framework yet. And nobody steers that and leads that. The building company has been asked to build. They're dealing with the lands that are around the railways, but it's not their job to deal with the rest. So that's my question to RATP director. Is there a pilot on the plane? And who would be that? Because we need some balance for the social life in Paris. That's a broad question. That's a broad question indeed. RATP is actually a project contractor, especially for the line 14, north and south. And what you're describing is the GP, which is the pilot on the plane, actually. We are nothing but client representative. When you are developing a project like this, you have actually all the local authorities. There is a governance of the GP, and in this you have all the stakeholders that are represented. But it's true that when we look at the 68 gares, the 68 stations, there's a different project. The architectural gesture is different. We can see that it is wonderful because it's very diversified. And for each of these stations, because we haven't talked about the culture, because this is fundamental for the city. There's a cultural project that is very well developed. And this is what the LGP has been done with the call for projects. So it is true, the governance of the way the flows are going to be balanced between the northern part, the southern part, the east and the west. This has been viewed when the project design was made. Christian Blanc was doing that, actually. But there is no, in terms of demography and sociology, there's no place where, apart beyond from CNRS studies, we would not think and focus on that subject. And I think this is a blind spot, as you say. I can see that you seem to be English. I like that, actually. I like your accent. But RATP is a client representative here. And the aim is to gain momentum on that subject because we have the engineering, we have the knowledge as client representative. So we're developing nowadays a subsidiary called Solution Ville that encapsulates all these solutions, but it was born 2 years ago only. And the LGP project started 20 years ago. So we need to definitely go into that direction. Other questions? Sir? Hello, Olivier Domenac. I'm a citizen of Aix-en-Provence. As for the transformation of our living conditions, how can we actually fight against the invasion of public spaces from advertisement? It requires a lot of energy, it produces heat. How can we stop this invasion? Who wants to answer to that? I don't want to be the only one to speak, but as for Parisian metros, we have this type of ads. In the deal that we entered into in the call for bids, we made sure that the environmental criteria would be complied with. When we look at an ad display and the ones that we have in the Paris metros, the energy consumption has been reduced by 4. We have written down in the book of specifications and recommendations to have a good framework. Everything depends on the way you work with this type of company and what the public partners do to take for granted all the environmental issues. I'm talking about the Parisian metro, of course, because I cannot talk about Aix-en-Provence, for instance, but I think this should be dealt with at the time of the drawing up of the call for bids. And we should actually insist upon their environmental impact. A lot of progress has been made over the last 10 years on this subject. Arnaud, you would like to answer? Just, I would like to follow up on a good study that has been carried out and that we have at our disposal. When we look at what the French wish for 2040, it's sobriety. We've talked about going backwards in terms of growth, but when we look at the expectations that were expressed by the politicians, but also the companies, we seem to all agree on this. So we have to go back to everything that we've said. So in our ecosystemic approach, we should have a common approach. And if the decision makers, the politicians who give the impetus on this do not answer do not meet the needs and the wills of the citizens, then we should definitely do something about it. We need to have a debate. We need to have discussion, citizen with the citizens, and in presence of the companies that offer solutions, because we shouldn't see the politicians as only an intermediary. We should all work together. Companies that aim at creating living conditions, citizens that live in those conditions, but also the political decision makers and public authorities, local public authorities that contribute to it. It's actually an ecosystem. And this is actually a type of debate and discussion that is lacking today. Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to end up now. Thank you to all of you.